I was sometimes thinking, "Oh, I just wish I would get sick. Maybe it would be good if I would get into a car accident so I could just stay at home and recover and relax and not do this crazy rat race anymore." Sometimes I was thinking it would be great if I would cut myself and I would be just somehow disabled to be able to go to work the next day. Do you consider yourself a high achiever? Smart, driven, highly successful? I am so excited to have you. My name is Julia Arndt, and I'm the host of the Stress Podcast. I will help you develop your stress resilience the same way you've developed your workplace superpowers. Learn peak performance tools to thrive at work and in your personal life. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome back to the Stress Podcast. I'm your host, Julia Arndt, and I honestly couldn't feel more excited and grateful for you today that you have particularly decided to turn on this podcast episode. Because in today's podcast episode, I want to get super personal with you. I want to talk with you about my own burnout story, because it's pretty much exactly 5 years ago that happened to me. In the summer of 2019, more specifically in July of 2018, I burned out. I went to the doctor, I got diagnosed, and a lot of things have happened since then. So many things have happened, so many changes that I brought into my life, so many things that have obviously changed for me on the external world as well, because I started this business because of that experience. So I want to talk with you about all the things. I want to talk with you about my early warning signs that I was pretty close to burnout. I want to talk with you about what I did, what I changed, what kind of routines and habits I implemented in order to support myself and my nervous system through that period. And I also want to share my biggest learnings and recommendations for you if you feel like you are in a similar space today. So before we jump into all of these different things, let me share two quick things with you. If you would like to be part of the next Conversations with Julia podcast, make sure to register. The link to the form is in the show notes. What you can expect from joining live to these Conversations with Julia podcast episodes is that you get first-hand insight into what I'm obviously sharing in these podcast episodes, but you also get the unique opportunity to speak to me, to chat with me, to ask me any questions, to get coached live during the session, and I would love to see you there. The best way to support me and say thank you for this episode is by sharing it with one person that would benefit from this content. I know you've been doing this because in the past 2 months, the download rates of the podcast have tripled, which I am super grateful for. And besides joining this special series as a guest, the Conversations with Julia series, you can also sign up for my Plan Your Week with Julia Monday calls that are happening every Monday at 8 a.m. PST. It's a 30-minute free Zoom call where I help you plan your week and coach you through any specific questions you may have. And the link to the sign up is in the show notes as well. So without further ado, I would say let's jump into the podcast today, 5 years after my burnout, my top learnings and recommendations. Hey there, and welcome back to the podcast on burnout today. This is a deeply personal podcast episode because it's pretty much been exactly 5 years, probably today. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it was mid-July 2018. And I went to the doctor and I got diagnosed at the time with depression and anxiety. So let me take a few steps back and tell you a little bit more about what happened at the time and where I was standing. So, as I took some notes for this podcast episode, I really reflected on, okay, what actually happened? Where was I? What happened to me? And I always think that my story really starts very early on. It starts when I was a school kid, when I went to high school and college, and I learned habits and routines to be a performer, to be a high achiever, to peak perform and to get good grades in school. And I learned ways to do that because it wasn't easy for me to be in school. I remember back then my sister coming home with A pluses every time, straight A's, and she didn't really have to do much to receive those. And I was pretty jealous. As a younger sister, I wanted to be just as good as my older sister that was highly intelligent and that didn't need to do much work in order to get those A grades. But for me, it was different. When I moved from elementary school to middle school, I suddenly started to come home with B's and C's, sometimes even D's. And I was super unhappy about it. Even though my parents never pushed me to bring home A's, I pushed myself. I had already that ambition super, super early on as a 10, 11-year-old that I wanted to be as good as my sister at the time. That was my measuring stick, right? That was my benchmark. I wanted to be as good as my sister. So I figured out a way on my own on how I could be just as good and how I could bring home good grades. And the way of how I did that was every time I would come home from school, I would sit down and I would rewrite all of my notes from the courses and classes that I had during that day. And then I wouldn't just rewrite those notes, but I would also study them and learn them by heart. And over time, I realized that in that way, I would suddenly start to get A's and B's, which was wonderful, right? That's exactly why I did this. And I felt extremely accomplished. I got a lot of praise and recognition from my parents, especially my dad, that I was doing a really good job and that I was working super hard and that I was really ambitious. And that felt really good. And so that got obviously super, super ingrained into my system because as I moved along into high school, into college, and then finding my first job, this is what I did every single time. I actually remember my first year in college, how much I was burnt out after the first year and finishing the final exams of the first year, and how much weight I lost because I put so much stress on myself to deliver good results. I wanted to get those A's and those B's in college as well, even though I knew that it was much more difficult to get those A's and B's in college, at least in Germany and France, which is where I studied at the time. And so, yeah, so that is kind of who I was, right? I learned from a very early age that when I put in hard work, the results would follow. And I think that worked really well for myself for those years, right? I learned that I put in hard work and good results would come out of that. And that really fundamentally shifted when I started my first job. As many of you know that have been listening to this podcast for maybe a few years at this point, because the Stressed podcast is 4.5 years old, I worked for Google. That's my first job that I had out of college. I started to work for Google in October of 2011 after finishing my master's degree in brand management and marketing. And I was super excited about my first job. I was tired of studying. I wanted to get into the real world. I had done a couple of different internships before that, and I was honestly super excited to start earning money. When I got to Google, and I remember it as it were yesterday, because it was obviously, I know I always say obviously, by the way, as a filler world. So don't feel I am being in any type of way when I'm saying the word obviously. I've gotten that feedback and I'm trying to improve it. And it's very interesting because now that I have become aware of saying that, I do understand how often I actually say it. So I apologize in advance. I'm trying to be better at that. I don't mean that it is obvious that you should know that. I mean more as a fact that for me that was obvious in a way, right? Because I know obviously my own story. Haha, here's obviously again. So, all right. So back to Google. So I started at Google in October 2011. It was yesterday. And I met so many incredibly intelligent people, and I was honestly a little bit intimidated. I remember one of my Noogler friends. Nooglers were the people, the new Googlers, the new people to the company. I remember one of them, my friend Janina, who I'm still really close friends with today, which is really wonderful. We've known each other for 12 years now. She was absolutely incredible. She was 5 years younger than me, because she just finished her bachelor degree and started at Google right away. She spoke, I don't even remember, 5 or 6 languages fluently. And she just had an absolutely incredible resume. She was highly intelligent, super smart. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. This is the type of people that I'm going to work with now. And that was just one example of very many people that had all very incredible stories of how they landed a job at Google at the time in Dublin, Ireland. And so fast forward 7.5 years later, I was working then in Mountain View in California, in Silicon Valley at their headquarters. I had moved to the States in September of 2014. And I had worked on a huge project. I was actually the global project manager of a project that spanned across multiple different time zones. I had 60 stakeholders. I worked day and night because I had so many different stakeholders that were sitting on all different time zones. And I was working with vendor teams. I was working with internal teams. And at the same time, I had fallen in love with Lake Tahoe. And again, you might know this story, so bear with me. I had fallen in love with Lake Tahoe in 2016, in 2015, and then I bought a house here in 2016, and then started kind of this a little bit more rat race that I got into because of trying to bridge the need and the want to be in Tahoe during the weekends and continue to my job at Google in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. So what that looked like was I was working day and night from Monday through Thursday, and then I would drive up to Tahoe, which is about a 250-mile drive and a 4-hour drive when you're lucky without traffic, to get to Tahoe, and then work from here on a Friday. And yeah, and that's what I did for 1.5 years, 2 years, 3 years. I did it for 2 years, that back and forth. I started the back and forth, I would say, in September of 2015. And then, bought the house in the summer of 2016, and then burned out in the summer of 2018. So 2.5 years later. And there were many different pieces of that puzzle, right? I always say it wasn't just because of my job at Google that burned me out. It wasn't just because of the commuting that burned me out. It was also not just because of the thoughts that I had on my mind about starting to be kind of unhappy about that lifestyle that I was leading. From the outside, everyone thought I had the best of both worlds and I had the best life, right? I was working at an amazing company with great benefits and stocks and salary. And during the weekends, I spent my time in Lake Tahoe, which is a wonderful, beautiful place. If you've never seen it, make sure to Google it and take a look at some of the pictures. It's a really beautiful place here. And so it was really not because of one or the other, but it was the accumulation of all. And it wasn't just the accumulation of those external circumstances, but it was, as I know today, the accumulation of stress hormones that never decreased. My nervous system was so high, was so in arousal state, in that fight or flight state, or in that sympathetic state all of the time. And I never really took time to decrease it. I wasn't aware of it. I had no awareness of what I was doing to myself. The only thing that I did recognize at some point over the course of those 2.5, 3 years was those signals that started to happen to me emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I want to give you a couple of examples of those. I had extremely high anxiety. I remember, again, as it were yesterday, the anxiety that I had in the last couple of months before I got diagnosed with anxiety. And a doctor actually told me what I was experiencing, because I had no idea that it was anxiety that I was experiencing. I just knew I was constantly super nervous. Nervous in the sense of I might have a talk or a presentation in front of 20 people in 5 minutes. That kind of nervous was what I was experiencing all the time. My coffee intake wasn't helping. I had no idea that it wasn't. I felt like these little butterflies in my stomach all of the time. That also made me have digestive issues. A lot of the time I remember that my stomach wasn't great at the time and that I had a lot of digestive issues. I also remembered that I was constantly picking fights with my partner at the time. I was constantly unhappy. People were looking at my life and they were like, oh my God, this is so amazing. You're doing this great job. You have this amazing project and so much responsibility. And you're having this lake house and you're having this partner and you're doing all of these fun things during the weekend. And I was just plain exhausted. I was unhappy and I didn't know how to get myself out of it. I had no idea. I had no idea what was going on with me. I had trouble sleeping. That was another signal and sign of mine. I would wake up in the middle of the night with a pounding heart, thinking about all of the different things that still need to get done. And, as I already mentioned as well, I drove a lot. I drove 500 miles per week by myself in a very, very busy highway setting from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe, which you cross multiple rush hours there in the first 2.5, 3 hours. And that was extremely anxiety inducing and tiring and stressful. And it had a huge, profound effect on my body that I didn't realize. And now, when I drive the 4 hours to San Francisco or the Bay Area, I am shocked because now I am so aware, not obviously, but I am so aware of what my body is doing and the signs that my body is giving to me, that I know that it's really stressful to drive 4 hours. I love driving. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love driving. But driving in high traffic is stressful, and driving for 4 hours straight is a lot of stress on your body, especially when it is in a lot of traffic, right? If you're just going down Highway 395 and there's no cars to see left and right for 20 minutes at a time, that's obviously not that stressful. But I was driving in high traffic. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I think I already mentioned that, but this was a really important indicator for me. And there was another important indicator for me, and I've mentioned it before in various settings and episodes and podcast interviews that I did for other podcasts. I had self-harming thoughts, and I wasn't really aware of it either, in a sense. I didn't have suicidal thoughts, but I had self-harming thoughts. I was sometimes thinking, oh, I just wish I would get sick. Maybe it would be good if I would get into a car accident so I could just stay at home and recover and relax and not do this crazy, crazy rat race anymore. Sometimes I was thinking it would be great if I would cut myself and I would be just somehow disabled to be able to go to work the next day. Those were the kind of thoughts that I had. At the end, I'm not proud of it, but I'm sharing with you this insight because it's really important. Because I wasn't really aware at the time that that was a self-harming thought and I was judging myself for it. But it was really scary. It was really scary to think that way and to think, wow, what am I actually doing to myself? So I remember a day. I don't exactly know the date anymore, but I remember a Saturday morning. I was in Tahoe. I had a fight with my partner super, super early in the morning. And I went on a walk by myself. And I thought to myself, I can't do this anymore. I need to change something about this state. And I went to see a really good friend of mine, Carolyn, who I met at my yoga teacher training certification. And we had a really close connection. And she was kind of my mom here in Tahoe. She was in her 60s. She had 3 kids. And I just knew I could trust her and I knew that she could help me. And we were talking. I called her and I said to her, I need to talk to somebody. I need to make a plan because I can't do this anymore. And she said, okay, let's make a plan. And the plan was for me to go to the doctor on Monday and to get a medical leave in order to figure out what was going on with me. And that's exactly what I did. I sent an email to my manager. I remember all of the different feelings and thoughts that were going through my mind at the time as well. I felt extremely anxious and scared. I felt extremely guilty. I felt like I was I felt like I was a failure. I didn't know what was going on with me. I just knew that I couldn't do this anymore. And so I went to the doctor, had a conversation with her, and she gave me 2 questionnaires that honestly completely changed my life. She gave me a questionnaire on depression and a questionnaire on anxiety because at the time, burnout wasn't even recognized as an official disease by the World Health Organization. That only happened in May of 2019. And so they gave me depression and anxiety. Depression has a couple of very similar symptoms as burnout. So does anxiety. And I filled out that questionnaire, and it honestly blew my mind how often I said, yes, I am experiencing this every single day. And it blew my mind so much because it was the first time that I had something black on white that showed to me I actually have a problem. I guess there's something that I'm experiencing that is not normal. It had become so normal at this point, right? Because I was doing this for 2 or 3 years. And as I was telling you as well from the story of me as a young child, as a young kid, I had learned always to push myself. I constantly pushed myself, and there was always a lot of pride in that pushing as well. There was a lot of pride in that ambition. There was a lot of pride in that discipline that I had created for myself. And so I had a conversation with my doctor, and I said to her, I need a medical leave. I need to get out of this in order to get a clear mind and figure out what I need to do next. So I got a 3 months medical leave. And I honestly, the first 4 weeks after getting that medical leave, I felt the highest anxiety that I had ever felt before because I finally started to rest and gave my body space to take a moment to breathe. And I guess during that time, I started to realize and become more aware of how anxious I actually felt. And I finally had a word as well to it that I could use to describe how I was feeling. And so my anxiety was skyrocketing in the first 4 weeks. I was super nervous. I was really nervous about what my team was thinking of me, what my manager was thinking of me. Here's a really important insight on that, because I've told this information many people in the past, and I want to share that with you as well. I did not have to tell my manager what was going on with me, and I didn't tell him. There was actually an external provider that managed that medical leave, and I asked them, and I also talked to an HR person at the company too, and they told me, you don't have to tell us what is going on with you. We just need a medical leave. We need, obviously, a paper from the doctor that confirms that you are not capable to work at the moment. And that's all we need. And I also chose at the time to not disclose to my manager what was going on with me. I was embarrassed. I felt guilty. I felt weak. I felt like a failure. And that was too much to bear at the time. I didn't want my manager or my teammates talk about me negatively on top of that. That was my biggest fear. Of course, as a peak performer, I was very, very attached to what others thought of me. And I'm sure that that's important for you as well. And it's totally okay. There's nothing wrong about that. We're all human beings, and we strive through feedback from others as well, right? There's a balance, right? There's a balance between what others say and what you think of yourself. And the more stressed you are, the more negative your thoughts are going to be. And the more negative your thoughts are going to be, the more negative your feelings are going to be. And then you're not making really good decisions and choices anymore. You might eat unhealthier. You might not go to the gym anymore because you feel like you just don't have it in you anymore. You might feel like you don't have that strength. You feel like you just want to veggie out in front of Netflix and watch TV, which is what I did most of the time because I was just absolutely crazy, exhausted all the time. And so I did not disclose the reason to my manager. And I want you to know that you don't have to do that. This is really important because at the beginning, it is really, really important that you protect yourself. If you are in the space of considering, well, maybe I do have burnout, that is okay. And here's one thing for you in order to help you through that. I'm going to link in the show notes a free burnout assessment, a burnout risk index to show you how high your burnout risk level is at the moment. This is really important because this is how I identified that I had a problem. Would have never known. I would have never known if I would have never filled out those questionnaires. But that was an incredibly important moment in my life to realize that and to honor that answer as well. And so take that test if you feel like maybe there's something about my story that somehow resonates with you, and don't be afraid what others think of you. And that is one of the biggest learnings that I want to share with you today, and the first one that I want to share with you today. I was so afraid what other people would think of me. So afraid. I told you all the things, right? I was anxious. I felt super guilty. I felt like I was a failure. I felt weak. I felt like everyone is judging me for not coming to work and for dropping all of my responsibilities. Of course, for 3 months, that's a super long period of time. I felt really bad for my colleagues that I had to take on all of the work that I left behind. And so that was really tough to take on. When I got back after my medical leave 3 months later, you know what my biggest realization was? My biggest realization was that the world kept turning at Google without me. It kept turning. Google is a big enough company, as you can imagine, that does not need me in order to take care of everything. We sometimes take ourselves too seriously and maybe too important, which I understand, right? I'm obviously a peak performer and I always take myself incredibly important as well, because that feels good, right? And at the same time, having the realization that I wasn't the most important thing and that the most important thing was to take care of myself was gold, right? And that was such a relief. I do remember this. I remember what a relief it was. When I came back, I had obviously managed my nervous system. I had regulated my nervous system, even though of course, there was some nervousness going back to Google as well after 3 months. But my biggest realization was, let's be honest, nobody really cared that I was gone. Because what people cared most about was that I was healthy, that I took care of myself, and that I was the best version of myself, bringing myself to work. And I couldn't do that anymore in the summer of 2018. So that is my biggest first learning that I want you to take away from this podcast episode today. If you are not feeling well, if you feel like you need some time to recover, relax, understand what burnout really is and what you can do in order to overcome it, it is okay to take time off. You are not the center of the universe. You are the center of the universe for yourself. And if you can't show up anymore as the best version of yourself, you're not going to be delivering good work. You're not going to be productive. You're not going to be focused. You're just going to be exhausted. You're not going to be the best person to be around, right? Because you're probably going to be super aggressive, protective. You're going to be annoyed all the time. And that's not who you want to be. Okay? Right? Am I right? I know I'm a little bit right because I've been going through this many times before. So let me take a step out of those big learnings. And I want to share with you what was the first thing I changed when I was on my medical leave. I don't honestly really know where it came from that I made that decision to change my morning routine, but I had surrounded myself with a lot of positive podcasts and coaches over the course of 2016, 2017, 2018. So something must have stuck in my brain to tell me maybe try a new morning routine. And that's exactly what I did. I remember that really clearly. I decided specifically that I want to change my morning routine. And one of the biggest things was my phone. I knew that that was the most anxiety inducing thing for me to wake up in the morning, roll over, grab my phone from my bedside table, and check my messages, check my personal messages, check my emails, check my social media, and not really spend any time for myself to recharge myself, to invest in myself, to energize myself. And I was really aware of that. Again, I don't really know where that came from, but it was just there. And I made that conscious decision. And I decided that I wanted to start my morning differently. For the first 30 to 60 minutes, I just wanted to be by myself. And that was such a huge change for me, such a huge change and such a huge positive impact on me. And so I started to set an alarm at the time, which now, I set an alarm at the time to wake up in the morning and have like 30 to 60 minutes in the morning for myself without my phone, writing in my journal. That's the other thing that I decided to do. Writing 3 things that I'm grateful for. So practicing gratitude, drinking a glass of water, and making my bed. Those were the 5 things that I started to change. And I'm still doing them today after 5 years because they have honestly had the biggest, most profound impact on my life. Such a big impact. I know you might have heard this many times before. Coaches or authors and speakers telling you, change your morning routine, practice gratitude, do something for yourself, be mindful, right? Don't look at your phone in the morning because those messages are still going to be there in 30 or 60 minutes. And that was such a relief. That was such a difference for me in the morning to start my day my way. Such a big difference. So if you're listening to this and you are curious to know what is one thing that I can do to start working on yourself, what is the first thing that you can do to overcome maybe burnout, because you took that free assessment on my website and you get maybe the orange traffic light or the red traffic light, then this is my answer. My morning routine changed my life. Absolutely. It wasn't the medical leave, really. It was that I stepped into my power. I took responsibility for myself. I didn't wait until I got my first panic attack or until I got my first anxiety attack, even though in hindsight, honestly, I probably had 1 or 2 of those. I was just, again, not aware of what was really happening to me. And there wasn't a lot of information on burnout at the time. 5 years ago, burnout wasn't an officially recognized disease by the World Health Organization. I feel like I had heard, I don't really know, maybe 1 or 2 people that had burned out before, but that was stuff that was discussed behind the doors. Nobody really talked openly about it. We didn't know what the signals were. There was no education around burnout. And obviously, here's my obvious again, but today, in the last 5 years, there's been so much information that has been coming out about burnout. So many more people that talk about it, so many leaders that are open about it, which is really wonderful and powerful, I believe. And yeah, so it's just super powerful. Morning routine, that's the most important thing. So, my mindset was an important thing as well, right? When we talk about what were the changes that I made, well, it was that change. I do want to talk about this for a second, actually, as well. The biggest change was my mindset. From going from this victim mindset of, oh my God, I'm so unhappy, and picking fights with my partner and taking everything super personally at work as well. And realizing that I wasn't a victim in this, but that I was managing my own life. And if I wanted to manage my own life, I had to make a decision for myself. And that included, as you know today, it included making an incredibly, incredibly difficult decision to leave Google. And here's the thing. It was not, and this is super, super important for me, for you to know. It was not because of the work that I did at Google. It was 100% not. I love Google. I still work with Google a lot these days, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that I get to work with this incredible company and with these incredible people, even after finishing my work at Google. I did not leave my job because of my burnout. I left that job because I had tried my very hardest for 3 years to find a team at Google that would let me work remotely, that would help me create a life structure that was actually supportive instead of destructive. And that's something that I put on myself. And I realized over the course of that 3 months medical leave that my values had shifted and changed. It was more important to me to be with my partner at the time and to be in my house where I felt home than to be in the Bay Area at a job that I loved to do and at a company that I absolutely loved to work for. It had nothing to do with my job. I tried really hard to stay in the company and find more flexibility, which was not possible at the time. 2020, 1 year later, after I left my job, everyone was remote, which was kind of ironic. I did not regret that move anyway, but I would have stayed at Google if it would have been possible. So that was an incredibly difficult decision that I had to make. And it was that decision and that realization that I make this decision. Nobody else can do this for me. And here's an important thing. Another important thing. My family and my partner did not support me in this decision. And that made it just so much more difficult. And they didn't really not support me in that decision in the sense of they told me to absolutely not do it, but they also didn't tell me to absolutely do it. They were like, why would you leave this job? It's such a secure job. You're making so good money. You have so great benefits. You have such a great salary. You're learning so many different things. You're working with so many intelligent people. And I was aware of that. I was very, very aware of that. I was aware what I was leaving behind. But I was starting to risk my health. And that trumped everything. My health was the most important. And that's what I realized during that summer. That's what I realized when I was filling out those surveys and questionnaires. That's what I realized when I started to have these self-harming thoughts. And I wished I would get into a car accident. Sure, I wouldn't have to do this freaking drive anymore at the time. So yeah, what do I tell you? This is a lot of personal insight, but I hope you are enjoying this, and I hope that you find this helpful to find the courage to take the step for yourself as well. It was a difficult situation. And, when you look back at these things 5 years later, you're like, yeah, I did, you kind of tell your story. Sometimes I do speaking engagements. Well, I actually do a lot of speaking engagements and I share my story a lot. And I always say to people, I know this sounds so easy, right? It sounds so straightforward. It sounds so like, this is what I did. And then I did this and then I did that. But when you are in the middle of it, I totally get it. It's not easy. It's very difficult. It's very overwhelming. But here's the good news. There's help for you out there. There's people like me that coach you through your burnout, that are here to support you in whatever you need during this time. Because I have been there and I know what it feels like. I know it's incredibly difficult. So I want to move back into those top learnings that I want to share with you today and the recommendations, because I know I've talked a lot today already. I'm looking at the time and I'm like, wow, I've really shared a lot of personal insights with you today, which is great. I'm happy about that. I'm happy that you can listen to this, and I really hope it helps you. So let's talk about a couple of other big learnings. We talked about the very first one, which I just want to remind you of, which is don't be afraid of what other people think of you, because the most important thing you can do for yourself the most important thing that you can do for you and for yourself is to take care of yourself. Okay. Top learning number 1. Here's my top learning number 2. Burnout happens over and over and over and over again. This is partially my own insight and partially the insight from my clients that I've been working with over the last 5 years. When you experience burnout and you're listening to this podcast right now, maybe it's not even the first burnout you experience. Maybe it's the second one or the third one. Know that that's okay. You're not the only one. You keep burning out because of one crucial reason. You haven't changed anything about how you live your life. When I talk to people that have had multiple burnouts, I always ask them, what changes have you made after your first burnout? What changes have you made after your second? And what do you think the answer is? The answer is, I took a medical leave. The answer is, I took a long vacation. The answer is nothing. I actually didn't change anything. And that's the problem. It is really important, and it's the most important thing for me today in this podcast, that you are taking away that you need to change something in your life. You need to change your habits and behaviors and routines that got you there, because what got you there won't get you out. It will not get you out. You need to start changing them. You need to learn what was in the way. And here's the next top learning that is connected to that, is that time management is the single biggest thing you can start to create space for yourself, because that is the biggest problem that I see in myself and in the work that I do with all of my wonderful clients that I have. When you don't have time, you're not going to create space to do things for yourself. So you need to create time. And time management is super crucial, because we need to learn how to prioritize our tasks. We need to learn how to be proactive instead of reactive. So then, when you have done that, you actually have an hour or two in the morning or in the evening in order to take care of yourself and to manage and regulate your nervous system and get your nervous system out of that fight or flight and get it into a rest and digest state, into the parasympathetic state, into the parasympathetic nervous system, we call it. That is really important. And those are the skills that are super crucial for that: time management, setting boundaries, stress management, mindset, limiting beliefs, all of the different things that I talk about in the 10-week Peak Performance Method program. Here's another top learning for you. The sky is not the limit. The capacity of your nervous system is. And I have been doing a lot of work to create space to invest in bouncing between those two systems, because you can actually not really influence how quickly your brain goes into that sympathetic state, into that aroused state, into that aroused nervous system state. But you can learn how to quickly get back out of it. You can learn the signals and signs that your nervous system is giving you when you are in that aroused state. I had no idea what that was for a very long time, but I learned it. And now I have been successfully not going back into a burnout over the last 5 years, which honestly I could have very well. I had all the opportunity to, because I've been building this business. I've been going through a huge breakup in 2020. There were a lot of external factors that could have bring me back into a burnout very quickly. But I changed my habits and routines, and that changed my whole life. And I changed the capacity of my nervous system. I learned that those aroused state phases are important for productivity and focus. And I also know today that I need to balance it with my parasympathetic state. I need to create the capacity for my nervous system to regulate itself. I need to give my system space to decrease the stress hormones in my body before I go to sleep, in order to make sure that I am the best version of myself every single day. We talked about time management. We talked about burnout happening over and over again if you don't change your habits and routines. We talked about the awareness and education of your nervous system. This is so important because here's the thing. You cannot avoid change. Change is omnipresent. It's always there. And change will happen even faster and even more so in the next years to come, especially with AI. Think about how quickly companies have to adjust because of all of the AI things that are coming out. You're going to be in change all the time. And your nervous system is triggered by change. You are in an aroused state over and over and over again because your body, your mind recognizes that change. And as much as you want, you're going to be affected by that, at least for a short period of time, maybe for a long period of time. If you haven't learned resilience skills, if you haven't learned how to manage your nervous system. And so it is becoming an absolutely crucial skill to know how to manage your stress. Absolutely crucial. Imagine all of the different reorgs that you're going to experience, how often you have to shift your business because of just the fast-paced world that we live in. Your brain hasn't had the capacity to adjust to that fast-changing world that we live in. And that's okay. You can't change that in that sense, right? Your brain is still going to react to those external changes with stress in order to help you pay attention and get the energy that you need in order to manage that situation at the time. And it is on you to decide at the end of the day how long you want to stay in that. It is on you to decide, am I going to invest in myself today? And I'm going to learn these absolutely crucial skills in order to take care of myself and be the most performant, best version, most ambitious version of myself all the time. Let me ask you this question. What is the impact? What would the impact be on your personal life, on your family, on your relationship, on your work, if you would learn this skill? You can't measure this. 15%, 20%, 50%, depends a little bit on what state you're in right now and how many skills you still have to learn in order to get out of that and manage and regulate your nervous system. It's not impossible. It is not easy, but it's also not difficult. It just requires work. And I know that you, as a peak performer, you know what discipline is. You know it because you have shown it over and over again, because you wouldn't be here where you are at today if you wouldn't be a very disciplined person. So let's apply this discipline and structure and grit that I know that you have into learning this absolutely crucial skill, which is stress management. If you want to have help with that, I'm here for you. I actually have 2 spots open for one-on-one coaching this summer. And if you're interested to work with me, reach out. You know where to find me. And if you want to just get started, take that first mini tiny step in the right direction, come to my Plan Your Week with Julia meetings on Mondays. Come there, join us, and learn how to better manage your time to create space for yourself to invest in regulating your nervous system. That's all I wanted to share with you today. I know that was a long episode today. I'm surprised myself, but obviously, hear this again, probably the 5th or 6th time. I know that my friend Aubrey is counting, but I have of course, a lot of things to share about this experience, right? I am super passionate about this. I want you to know that this doesn't have to be the state that you're in for the rest of your life. There is a different life. There's a better life. There's a so much better life after burnout. So don't be afraid to take that first step, whichever that first step is for you, no matter if it is a vacation, a medical leave, joining the Plan Your Week with Julia sessions, taking that assessment could be your first step, and then just take it from there step by step. Don't forget, though, that you need to take action in order to see things change. And don't forget that you have to change something, because just taking a vacation or medical leave is not change enough. You actually have to invest in building new habits and routines to support yourself sustainably over the long time. All right, my dear friend. Let's take a deep breath here together. That was a lot of information that I shared with you today. Maybe it triggered you. Maybe you have a lot of fearful thoughts right now. You feel a little anxiety. That's all okay. Let's just have those feelings here for a moment, and let's take a deep other breath into that. You are worth it. Take whatever you need: time, money, energy. Those are the 3 most important resources. And start to invest them in yourself. If you want to work with me, I have 2 spots available right now in order to help you learn these absolutely crucial skills. Reach out to me if you're interested in that. Otherwise, you have all these other beautiful, important resources in the show notes: the burnout risk assessment, the link to Plan Your Week with Julia on Mondays at 8 a.m. PST, and also the link to Conversations with Julia, the podcast series where you can be live and get coached. Thank you so much for joining this podcast episode with me today. If you found this information helpful and you know someone that also suffers maybe from burnout, maybe you're not really sure, then share this podcast episode with them and say, hey, maybe just check this out and listen to the story. I would really appreciate it, and the person that you share it with will really appreciate it as well. So thank you again for being here today with me. I appreciate you so much. I wish you a wonderful rest of your week, or a really good start to your next week if you're listening to this on a Saturday or Sunday or Monday morning. And yeah, I send you lots of love and hugs and kisses, and I hope to hear you in the next podcast episode. Until then, take good care of yourself and talk to you soon.